Good evening. Welcome to everyone. I'm Katy Dun, an educational counselor here at Prep Matters, and I am delighted to welcome you to our evening's town hall meeting. We know you have many questions about college admissions, and I am so pleased to welcome our guests with us today. I'm trying to stop our screen share while we're chatting so I can see our panelists. Still working out the technology, of course, like all of us. The college admissions process is daunting under the best of circumstances, and certainly this year the circumstances have been anything but. So we are delighted to welcome several experts here with us this evening to walk us through their experience. We truly would like this to feel like a town hall, so I invite all of our viewers tonight to use the Q&A function throughout the webinar to ask questions of our panelists. You will also see that you have the option of upvoting a question to emphasize that you are also interested in the answer. I'll try to keep a close eye on the box to guide the conversation. To get us started, I will introduce our panelists and ask them to kick us off by answering this first question. Would you share one piece of advice for current juniors about how to launch their college process with the most success and the least amount of stress? I will begin with Aisha Gonzalez, Associate Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Macalester College. A graduate of Mills College, where she also served as Assistant Director of Undergraduate Admissions, Aisha started out as an ambassador and soon discovered that admissions and financial aid is really about advocacy. She has experience working with and advocating for students from diverse backgrounds through the student-centered processes, collaborations, and intentional partnership. She serves as Communications Committee Co-Chair on the Minnesota Association of Counselors of Color Executive Board. And additionally, she is a member of the 2021 cohort of College Board's Midwestern Region Enrollment Leadership Academy. I've worked with Aisha before, and I love pointing out that in a year when everyone had too much on their plate, she took on a leadership academy. So welcome, Aisha.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Aisha, she, her, hers. I work at Macalester College, as Katy said. We're located in St. Paul, Minnesota. I think that, for me, my biggest piece of advice, having kind of seen the applications process through a whole year of the COVID context, is really just to take a deep breath. And try to only control things that are within your reach, right? Not to kind of stress yourself out with things that are not that are outside of that control. We can only control small things at this time, and that's okay. The reality is the same for all of us. We are all living at home. We are all working at home for the most part. We are all kind of dealing with this pandemic together. And so just know that, we have the same kind of context of where you're coming from as you make certain decisions that you may not have otherwise. So just take a deep breath and just control what you can.
We're all spending all day looking at ourselves on Zoom. Our second panelist tonight is Darius Pardner, Assistant Director of Admissions at Colorado College. Darius is a native Coloradoan who has spent much of his career in higher ed around the state. At CC, he works on a variety of projects, including the Admissions Fellows Program, Colorado Scholars Program, athletic recruitment, international recruitment, outreach, and access. Before joining Colorado College, Darius spent time in the admissions offices at University of Northern Colorado and the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, where he also earned both his undergraduate degree and his master's degree. Welcome, Darius.
Thank you so much for having me. When specifically thinking about the junior class, something that I think is really important to do is really do a search of self, really figure out what type of institution, not only that you'd want to be at to have those very foundational characteristics, right? Class sizes and distance from home and major. Yes, that's really important, but I encourage students to take a much deeper search of self to figure out not only what campus could be right for you, but what attributes do you need to personally develop and grow and get everything that you need out of those 4 years. Yes, it's important to focus on life after college because much of it is built around vocation and following your passions and academic interests, but to really maximize and get everything that you can out of your college experience, that warrants much search of self and finding out what you need and what that campus can do for you.
which perhaps the pandemic has given us more of a time for reflection. That's one of my hopes. And finally, I am honored to welcome Gil Villanueva, Associate Vice President and Dean of Admissions at University of Richmond. Gil joined the enrollment management team at University of Richmond in July 2009. Prior to his appointment at Richmond, Gil served as an admission leader at Brandeis University in Massachusetts, Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, and Harvey Mudd College in California. He earned his BA in psychology at Pitzer College in Claremont, California, and his MEd degree in higher ed at Bucknell. He has been recognized particularly for his service in national organizations and committees. He served as a board member as well as president and chair of the Common Application. He served on several counselors and the Task Force on Admissions in the 21st Century for the College Board. Gil served as faculty advisor for the Leadership in Enrollment Management Certificate Program at USC's Center for Enrollment Research, Policy, and Practice. He also travels for the U.S. Department of State's Office of Overseas Schools as a representative of American Higher Ed, or at least he once did those things. Welcome, Gil.
I'm so sad. We all can't travel anymore, but we will, you guys. We will be able to do that. So basically, I'm like Yoda of the group. I'm ancient. This is almost year 30 now. And I have a son in college and a daughter who's a senior in high school.
Ooh.
So my advice is coming from not so much my professional life, but from personal experience. Students, you have to own the process. You will enjoy it so much more if you're in charge. This means then, right, you and Ms. Dunn used the word reflect. I actually talk about 3 R's, right? You need to reflect because you need to think about what you want, what you're interested in. And then you need to think about the resources that you have available, right? So if you have a counselor or not, you have access to, let's say, good counseling, or let's say just understanding all the things that are available to you online, including offices of admission and offices of financial aid. And the last R, right? So reflect, resources, research. If you don't do the homework, if you rely on someone else, it's not going to be as much fun for you. So try to have,
Oh, you've muted yourself. How very 2020 of you, Gil.
you guys are going to be good to go.
That leads me directly into my first question. So thank you, all 3 of you, for such a nice setup. I think many of our students on the call right now are just launching that research process. And I find that we tell teenagers a lot, go research colleges, but it's very unclear what we mean by that. So particularly given that colleges have in dramatic ways increased the virtual options in ways that I think are really probably very positive for most students. I would love your advice on how students should be making the most of those virtual options available without becoming overwhelmed, and maybe kind of what are the guiding questions they should be asking themselves as they dig into their college research. And I see Darius nodding, so I'm going to ask you to get us started.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Just from our research, we're right now definitely in the middle of reading season right now. And a lot of what I'm reading in our applications is that students are doing research on us as far as researching the class size and different study abroad opportunities, their major and different types of course offerings, which is great. But a lot of us would also, I think the biggest thing that I can say is when you are researching these institutions, do it in a way that gives meaning to you. It's great to attend an information session, but a lot of us are working overtime to create individualized and personalized virtual engagement opportunities. Colorado, we are a very convenient location for the outdoors, and that's what brings a lot of people to our doorstep. And so we try to meet students in that process and offer those types of opportunities. So engaging, I think, in a meaningful way that brings meaning to you, not just doing general research, is a way to get a lot out of the process.
I love that. And it also helps with a little bit of the feeling overwhelmed. If you have a specific idea of what you are looking for and questions you are asking. Aisha, do you want to jump in and add anything to that?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of tools that are out there and I'm not going to name all of them. You can do a quick Google search and you're going to come up with like 10 different sites to go over so many different things, especially if you're not sure where to start. So that's a good starting place. But I think there's a lot of organic information that's out there. So, you're all on your phones. I know you are. I know you're all on social media. Wait, so follow us, right? And it's already in your feed. It's already something you're doing on a regular basis. It's not something you would add on to outside of clicking the follow button of whatever site you're using. And not just follow the main sources of the campus information, right? It's important to follow like our official pages and whatnot, but also follow like student groups. Get to know their experience a little bit, because you're going to see some parts of that experience, that information that's going to relate to you in a different way than maybe an email that we might send. Like we love to send emails, and certainly encourage you to sign up for our mailing list. But there's a lot of organic and free ways to get information with, again, not feeling overwhelmed, because it's already things that you're using. So I encourage you to do so that way.
2 years ago, I had a student who was answering a very short why us question for a university. And he said, I just really like their Instagram feed. Is there a way I can say that? And I was like, I mean, dude, I want you to tell the truth. So say what you need to say, but maybe like think about what was meaningful to you about the Instagram feed, why that is attractive. And Gil, anything to add to that? How's your Instagram feed?
Well, unfortunately, I don't do Instagram. I do text. I'm not that ancient. But here's the deal, students. If I tell you the sky is red, would you believe me? No, right? There's bad information out there. So you want, as much as possible, to go to the source. You want to go to reliable sources. Keep that in mind. You can't believe your crazy neighbor down the street, right? You can't believe things that are just popping up sometimes out of the blue and think it's all factual information. So you have to do a little bit of digging in, but if you know the source is legitimate, then you should feel good about that information, okay?
Great advice. Quickly, one more thought on this question of research, where I imagine you are getting a lot of questions from families. Are your individual campuses open for visitors? Anyone?
I'm happy to start. So yes, we are at parts of the year. We do have students living on campus. And so at the start of each of our modules, we have kind of taken a quiet period, if you will, to allow for anybody who's been traveling to kind of self-quarantine and just for the care and the safety of everybody. So we have been allowing it on campus, but it is very limited capacity. It's outdoor tours only. It's one family at a time, up to like 4 people. I mean, if you have a lot of younger siblings, that's fine, but generally 4 people, just trying to kind of minimize the exposure risk, if you will, and whatnot. I mean, who knows what the end of summer is going to bring and what that's going to look like. I'm sure many of us are kind of hoping for, but also planning, a long plan A, B, C, D list. But that's currently what it looks like for us right now in Minnesota.
Great. And how about in Colorado, Darius?
Yeah, we actually are not operating. I guess our admission office is not on campus right now. We're not hosting campus tours at this point in time. We are doing the whole carry around the iPad and show you various parts of campus, which I'm sure a bunch of institutions are trying to perfect at this point in time. We're hopeful that this is something that we can try to accomplish this summer. But right now we're really dealing with our students on campus, trying to make sure that they're safe as best we can.
And Gil?
So Richmond last fall, we were fortunate to be in person and obviously on campus. And that's the plan again this year. With that in mind, our priority is to keep, like everyone else here, is to keep our students, faculty, and staff healthy and safe. With that said, we do have limited opportunities on a Saturday and a Sunday where we are able to offer information sessions and tours as well. And like Macalester, limited to 4 per party. So if you're interested in learning more about Richmond, make sure you register. It's going to be difficult for us to accommodate you if you just show up. You got to register.
Right.
Another R, register.
This is a good reminder, I think, that there are human beings at the other end of those admissions emails, and you should always be checking the website, giving them a call, trying to make sure you understand. And I've asked that question of several sets of admissions officers in the past couple of months, and I always get a variety, like a variation on the different options. And I think that really speaks to the fact that every university campus is working hard to try and make sure they make the right choices for their community. And I think all families, as much as you want to see schools, are trying to work with that as well. Thinking about that, about all the reopening that you've done, the different ways you've been able to serve your students, I would love, many of our parents on the call have been asking me, what questions should they be asking about kind of where COVID sits on your campus, what that might mean for next year? Are there lessons learned and things you think might stick around, things that might be red flags or gold stars to a visitor? Any thought, sort of very big picture on your own campus or on things you've seen in other campuses that parents could be learning from COVID response? And Gail, I've done you twice the last question, so I'm going to start with you.
All right. So again, I'm going to go with personal experience here. So my daughter, as you know, is a senior, and I mentioned that earlier, and much of her research, unfortunately, was remote. It's true that we're able to go ahead and just walk around certain campuses that allowed us to do that, but that's still, I thought, very good. But the big lesson I want to sort of share with everyone is this. You can learn a lot about an institution by the manner by which they treated their current students, faculty, and staff when the pandemic hit. If they treated them well, keeping in mind their safety, their health, and making sure that whatever they needed to do to make sure that everyone was comfortable, if refunds had to happen because of, let's say, students had to go home, all of those things are critical and important. And now, because we've had some time to adjust with the pandemic, try to do some research. All of us have COVID pages, which gives you an idea of all the things that these institutions have sort of implemented, the resources that they have made available. That might give you yet another glimpse in terms of just how you might be treated at these institutions.
I love that. And a great lesson for life for kids, actually, to kind of think about the context of an institution they're looking at. Darius or Aisha, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think one thing that we learned is that our academic curriculum lends itself to a bunch of flexibility, where we didn't necessarily have to sacrifice for the sake of academics or learning, right? So I think that was something that we were grateful on, but we want to build on our one class at a time academic curriculum. We thought that we had it figured out in this sense, but we realized that we can actually expand on this and get even more flexible. Because I think that's what colleges are going to end up having to do is transition and saying, how can we build infrastructure that can be sustainable and last? Because the pandemic taught us a very, very hard lesson.
I love that you set up this next question so nicely, Darius. Could you explain a little more what you mean about the Colorado College academic curriculum and the one class at a time for those folks on the call who may not be familiar with how cool your learning is on campus?
I do, and I do apologize for making it CC specific. And I think that's just one of the biggest lessons that we learned. Colorado College is one of the few institutions in the world that we know of that operate on this one class at a time academic curriculum. For 3.5 weeks, for 3 hours a day, 18 physical class periods, you're worrying about one class and one class only, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Once that class is over, it's an intense 3.5 weeks. You get a 4.5-day break. We call it a block break, and then you're right into your next class. You do that 4 times a semester, 8 times a year. But no more are the days where you're taking 6 classes at a time with 6 different professors, 2 different group projects, 4 different papers. Students are really able to hyper-focus on one course, and it makes learning matter again, is what students will say once they get to our campus. And so when you are in the pandemic, I feel like it was our students valued their learning experience so much more when they were able to have that deep dive in, and it was flexible. We're going to spend a few days in the Rocky Mountain region outdoors, and then we're back to the virtual setting. And then maybe we'll have a few days on campus, but you're able to move that way because you don't have a strings attached type of academic curriculum and academic experience. And students loved it, and we're going on 51 years of doing it.
That makes so much sense about the shifting because you're only focused on one group of students and one professor. That's That's genius. Right. And I put you on the spot. I like talking about Colorado College. I'm going to give both Aisha and Gil a chance to talk about their particular programs too. But I think one of the things that's important, especially with a group like this, we have 3 schools that in some ways are quite similar. Obviously similar goals, a little bit of a similar size, very different parts of the country. But I think it's important for students to be able to know, as a part of their research, I want to know what it feels like to go to school at this student. Like, once I've determined the academics are high caliber, it's tough to determine what it feels like to be a student at this school. And so I think being able to dig into some of the unique qualities of each campus is actually one of the great benefits of a conversation like this. So thank you for indulging me in that. Aisha, anything to add about kind of lessons learned from this year, ways parents and students should be looking at COVID response in their searches?
I mean, just to echo, I think what everyone else is saying, I think, we certainly had to take a year of investing in new technologies and new resources, and those things aren't going to go away. So I think gone are the days where like visits are the only way that you can really get that experience. We're going to have virtual opportunities moving forward. We're going to have virtual high school visits. I mean, so many of us have now been able to visit high schools in places that we have never been able to physically get to before, because there's, just geographically difficult for us to. And so I think that we have kind of opened ourselves into new spaces and new areas where now we have to figure out what the hybrid model of that looks like, and the balance looks like. But I think that there are so many more new opportunities than we maybe have had to think about prior to the pandemic.
Great. Now I want to dig in a little bit to the nuts and bolts of applying to college, and things that I'm sure that in the middle of reading and the SAT. So right now, all 3 schools are in nuanced positions of a similar place for test optional admissions. I would love to unpack that a little bit. Both Macalester and Colorado College have adopted permanent test optional policies. Darius at CC has done this for 2 cycles, so pre-COVID. Macalester did announce their decision during COVID, but my understanding is that it was announced as permanent, and University of Richmond is still trying to figure out the best way to serve their students for upcoming cycles, I believe. We
just extended for 1 more cycle.
Okay, there we go. 1 more cycle.
Hot off the press this week.
I say that's very new because I didn't know that. Great.
Like 2 days ago.
Fantastic. So I would love kind of your impressions of how this kind of on the ground impacts your holistic. All 3 of you, your schools already had a holistic admissions process. So how does this change fit in? And then sort of thinking forward for students, what that might mean for them as they're making their choices and planning for their own college process. I'm going to start with Darius, since you have gone through 1 more cycle of this than anyone else.
Yeah, and you loved it. You hit it on the head, and we definitely used that as a staple this year, saying that we are test optional, and it was not in direct response to COVID, but actually happened a whole cycle before then. And really, a lot of that thinking was just us saying, there's other ways to gauge a student's readiness, to gauge a student's intellectual curiosity, to really judge their ability to come on your campus and do great work. It's so much more than 4 hours on a Saturday, right? We put a lot of value on 4 years on an academic transcript, your ability to write at a near college level, who you are outside of the classroom, and your ability to come on our campus and be a dynamic leader. So when you think about holistic review, those are things that we're looking at. For us, testing isn't as major as it seems as far as the higher ed landscape. So if we don't get testing, which about 28% of our student population in our first cycle did not submit testing.
Okay.
For us, when we don't get testing, we just put more emphasis on your ability to write as well as your academics. And so we kind of use those indicators to look at ability to come on campus and be successful if we don't get your standardized test scores. But keeping in mind, close to 70% still do. But that's kind of how we operated on it, is that we look at other aspects just that much more critically if we don't have that testing number.
Great. And Aisha, Gil, what did you see this year, having, I'm sure, spent a lot of time this summer training yourselves and thinking about how your staff would be looking at these applications, and now kind of being deep in the midst of your 2nd or 3rd round of reading? Aisha, do you want to jump in there?
Sure. And, my previous context, I came from a school that was already test optional. So I had the unique experience of being like one of the few in my office that was more familiar with it than others. But I think what's great about the test optional environment is, like, as Darius was saying, it really allows you to kind of focus on and emphasize other parts of your experience throughout your educational journey. We can take into account things like your high school context, for example. And when you talk about holistic review, we've been talking about that, but I think it's a bit more concrete now, right? We can kind of name it a little bit better as to what we mean by that. What types of opportunities at your school are available to you, and how does that then lend to your overall experience and the choices that you make within that. So it gives us a bit more of that chance to kind of critically think through your experience, how that experience is going to translate to our college environments, how it has prepared you for our college environments, and then what kind of person and what kind of contributor are you going to be in our communities as well. So I think we're able to ask ourselves a lot more of the deep dive questions than just, are they an A student? At the end of the day, there's so much more to you than just being an A student, right? So.
Right. And Gil, what did you guys learn this year? What have you seen?
So ditto to my colleagues. Now I just checked again, students and parents and family members. If you look into fairtest.org, you will see that 1,685 plus colleges and universities, that's more than 2/3 of the four-year schools in our nation, are actually either test optional or test blind, right? So, schools certainly understand sort of what's happening in the marketplace. We're talking about access issues. We're talking about lots of closures, just inability for students to be able to take the test. So we all get it. But as far as the big lesson we learned that because we've already have been employing a very holistic application review process, whereby we're looking at anywhere from 7 to 8 different things, one more thing outside of that, or not having test scores, was just fine. And in fact, at Richmond, half of our applicants elected not to submit a test score. So we learned also that what a great, wonderful world we live in, whereby I can call on a colleague, and I did, to do our research, contacted colleagues all over the country and asked them about how they do it. We even had one of our friends conduct a seminar, a 1-hour seminar, in terms of how they actually make decisions without test scores. So to the point made earlier, right, in the end of the day, we put more stock than anything else on what you did throughout your high school program. How did you push yourselves, and did you perform well? But understand, students, we don't expect that you've taken all of the APs, IB, honors, advanced, yada, blah, blah, blah. We want to see some in the areas that you've excelled in, and of course in the areas perhaps you might be thinking about studying in college, right? And of course, from a student development standpoint, we want to see, if you had a bit of a rocky start, your academic performance is going up. We don't want to see performance going down. So keep up your good work, and you're going to have more options because of it.
Am I frozen? Uh-oh. Are we back? You are all still there. I was just frozen. Okay, great. Sorry about that, friends. But I love that. I think we do have a couple of questions in the chat about, and you may not have this information yet, given the we are in the midst of the cycle. But do you have any sense of where the test scores fall in percentage of admitted students? I think one of the things I've heard a lot of folks say is test optional is sort of the same things as internships are optional and APs are optional. It gives to build their profile. So Darius, in particular, do you have any numbers on that, on how your enrollment looked last year, or your accepted students?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have the actual percentage of these were the accepted students and these were their scores, or even the amount of students that submitted scores, the amount for them being accepted. What I always say is that students always wonder, well, should I submit or not? A lot of us will publish what we call our middle 50%. I always call it the competitive scores, right? And they have this range, right? The 1340s to the 1400s or 1300s to 1400s, whatever it may be. Obviously, the more competitive score is closer to the higher end of the range is what I always say. And so it's kind of hard to gauge as far as who's been admitted in that number,
Right.
and for who has and who hasn't submitted. But students are always wondering about that competitive advantage, and much of that is, should you submit your scores or not? A lot of it is based on the institution. Don't compare yourselves to your peers, more
Right.
so because you're being compared to the actual applicant pool in itself.
And if your scores strengthen your application, then you should submit them.
Absolutely.
If they don't, then maybe you don't submit them. Maybe you keep them to yourself.
Clear as day, right?
Yep. We have seen, this is also one of the questions in the chat. We have heard from a lot of schools this year that the numbers they saw of applicants in early and in regular applicant pools defied expectations in a couple different ways. We heard about some very low numbers for early schools. We've heard, obviously, in the news, some very high numbers. There is some speculation that the shift to test optional admissions may be a part of, hey, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring, or just general COVID anxiety makes me want to apply to more schools. Have you seen, what have you seen in your offices? And in particular, what can parents and students in the junior class expect that these numbers might mean for their process next year? Gil, you want to get us started?
So at Richmond anyway, this is our first year and we adopted this test optional policy. In early decision 1, roughly 40% of those that we offered admission to submitted a test score. So that tells you the other 60% did not.
Right.
In early action, it's flipped. So about 37% did not submit a test score and about 60% submitted a test score. So it's kind of interesting. And I think this is the reason why. Students, very important, you compete when schools offer multiple application plans. You generally, not always, it depends on some schools, but you generally compete within the context of the actual application plan. It would be then important for you to ask if that's the case from school to school. Because some institutions, I used to work at one of them, I worked at 4, you competed with everyone in the pool, regardless of the plan, because that institution had a pretty good idea, right, in terms of year in and year out, the kind of applicants that they tend to attract. For the most part, again, I think many schools will tell you, if you apply early decision, a lot of, admission offices get pretty excited about that, because part of our job is not just to build an orchestra each and every year. You know what I mean by that, right? Students from all over the world, different things that they do, right? But also we're interested in happy future alumni. By applying early decision, you kind of eliminated the guesswork on our end if you really want to be on our campuses, right? So I think this is my advice. And this is what I told my daughter. I told my daughter, you know what? You had 2 tests canceled on you. They did not even give you a notice. Poor thing had to get up early, So anyway, I told her, take it anyway, because you don't know how you might score. And what if you do well? And thankfully, she's smart like her mom. She did very well with the test scores. But she also had to think about where she's applying to the point that Darius made earlier, right? Even though she scored really high within our cohort, she's in the top 10% nationally. But some of the schools that she applied to, literally one of them had over 100,000 applications total, and 16,000 were early decision. So you got to do, again, the word research.
Wow. So all of us are just making all of your jobs much harder. Is part of what I'm learning here. And Aisha, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different things that are not just institutional for us that have kind of experienced the increase that we saw, but I think there's also some national things that we have to consider too, right? So like institutionally, we didn't just go test optional. We also added early action on top of 2 early decision deadlines.
Right.
So there was that piece. That wasn't enough just to be test optional. But I think, you know, we have not only a pandemic and in a pandemic, but also what's being called like the enrollment cliff, right? Like the number of college age students that are out there that are going to college has shortened and is continuing to shorten over the next, you know, 5-10 years. And as we get into that, what we're seeing is that students, the number of bodies aren't changing, right? Like it's not growing, the number of students. The students are just submitting out more and more applications. And so I think we are having to make more decisions around that. And the fact that, you know, as students, you kind of hold some of the power, if you will, because of that. And so just be mindful that, you know, when we talk about intentionality, that's what we're really getting at, is making sure that you're doing your research, that you've thought about things. Because, you know, when you come down to getting all your decisions, you're going to want to be able to make choices between things that actually matter to you at the end of the day. So.
Yep. I often tell students, if you apply to 18 colleges and you get into half of them, something you couldn't figure out in a year while you were doing this process, which is incredibly challenging. So it's much better to be strong in your research early on so that you're not putting that pressure on yourself in May or April of senior year when you should be worrying about prom shoes and hanging out with your friends. We do have a question here in the Q&A, which actually I think also a little bit builds on something that Gil mentioned last time. So I'm going to just read it word for word. It's quite well written. I've read numerous articles by admissions officers from top colleges saying they are not looking for well-rounded students. They are looking for someone with a spike. In other words, one thing in which the students are exceptionally passionate and very good. It seems like military academies do want well-rounded people, but only if they are varsity athletes. How accurate does this sound in your process? I see lots of thoughtful eyes on the screen.
So,
Darius, what do you know? Gil, what do you think?
I can't speak for every school, and I worked across the country and unfortunately limited to highly selective schools. But because all of the 4 schools I've served are residential, and that means then, you know, we're really interested in the kind of community members that will contribute not just in the classroom, but outside, who will be good roommates, right? And 3 of the 4 had an honor code. So we are going to be accounting for those things. But when we're looking into activities and so on, it's such a, to me anyway, a myth that we're interested in well-rounded students, right? Because it's true, what we want in the schools I've served is a well-rounded incoming class, right? So we're talking again about my analogy about an orchestra. So it's okay if you're pointy, if you're angular, and I don't know if that means it's really a spike, you know? I mean, I don't expect every 17-year-old to have one passion. Sometimes you all might be interested in a couple of different things, but whatever you do, right, let us know the kind of impact you've made in that whatever activity. You don't have to be the president, you don't have to be the captain, you don't have to be the chair, but we just want to know if you did something, did you make an impact?
Great, I saw a lot of head nods. Aisha, I think you were about to jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, my sentiments echo what Gil's saying. I think that there's, that's again where the research is going to come into play and be very important, right? Is that we're all kind of looking for different things. We all have the different things that we value, different priorities on our campus. And I think that's going to inform some of the decisions that we make when it comes to the application process, right? And who we select to form our class. And so if you're, again, intentional about where you've applied and where you want to be, we're going to be able to see that alignment. So in your applications, just be aware that you should be speaking to those things. You should talk about the impact that you're making. You should talk about how, you know, maybe that your values align with the school, and not just align so much that you're like in step, right? But like, how are you going to challenge the school to also grow in areas too, right? We don't need everybody to be the same. We're not expecting to be robots on our campus by any means. It's an institution for higher learning, right? So just kind of being mindful of that.
Great. Darius? Anything
Yeah. Much like Gil, I've had the opportunity to spend a large majority of my time at a highly selective institution where you get 10,200 applications, you send out 1,200 offers of admission, 570 come back saying we're coming, right? And so when you look at that specific 570, it is an orchestra in a sense, saying that these kids are from different states, different countries, different backgrounds. I think a lot of the stigma around well-rounded is doing a bunch of different things for long-standing periods of time. I think a lot in that could be privileged to say that, oh yeah, I've done Key Club and I've done National Honor Society and I've done band and I've done those marquee things that look great on an application. But the reality is not everyone has that high school experience and the high school path.
Right.
I have, you know, as a reader of applications, I have sympathized with and empathize even with someone who has a part-time job or someone that is the eldest sibling in their household of a single parent household. And I don't necessarily have time to do National Honor Society and commit to the band and do a sport because I'm either working and helping provide for my family or making sure my siblings don't burn the house down. So whatever it is that makes you more than a student, whatever it is that takes up time outside of the classroom, share that with us. Be your authentic self. And if that college doesn't appreciate what you bring to the incoming class, that's not the college for you.
I love that. Absolutely. And if you are the oldest of a bunch of siblings, that makes you a pretty good roommate, honestly. So back to Gil's point, well done. Sticking with this idea of kind of students who are jumping into this process. Locally in Washington, D.C., many of our school systems, and I think throughout the country, remain fully virtual. They hope to head back to the building this spring, but a lot of them have not. Many local private schools were able to adopt a hybrid model early in the fall. So what advice do you have for those students who are requesting letters of recommendation, completing coursework, filling out applications, often in the absence of much of the school support they may have received? When it's given numbers of a counselor caseload, they might have been less likely to get the close attention anyway. We're sort of widening that gap. What advice do you have for those students in helping introduce themselves to your committee? Darius, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think it goes back to what Gil was saying, and you have to own this process. Even when you come to our college, to any of one of our institutions, you have to own that process yourself. The self-advocacy starts for many when you get to high school, and much of that starts when you're with your college counselor. I encourage students not to put so much on their college counselor to the point to where they're not advocating and they're not owning the process in themselves. Start early. Locate who you want to write your letters of recommendation. Obviously, you want people who know you well. We always say get people who from junior or senior year. That can really speak to to who you are inside and outside of the classroom. But I think the biggest thing is that we saw a big delay in COVID. Everything was pushed back in time. And so I think to really combat that outside of owning the process is start early and give yourself some time. That alleviates some stress as well, just like anything else, whether it's an AP class or whether it's a group project. Starting early alleviates stress and increases the chances of putting out a quality product.
Yep. Aisha, how about you? Any advice for those students who maybe are having trouble connecting with their teachers for letters of recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting early is definitely going to be a huge role in a lot of that. I mean, folks only have so much time outside of working hours to be able to work on those things, right? Your teachers are spending time outside of grading papers to be able to do that. So the more time you can give them, the more time they're able to dedicate to writing a thoughtful letter recommendation, right? Again, as Darius said, choosing people that really do know you, and not just know you academically, but maybe know you personally, know a little bit about your home life, can speak to some of the challenges that you might be facing. Those are some of the most fruitful letters for us. I would say that, if you are at a high school, and I was one of them, I went to a very large public high school where my counselor didn't know me very well. We don't really hold that against you necessarily, right? Like, we see that there's 900 people in your class. We see that their caseload is 350. I'm not necessarily going to expect that they're going to write a glowing letter of recommendation for all 350 seniors on their caseload. And many times they often don't. And I don't hold that against you. And many of my colleagues do not hold that against you. And so I want you to also realize that, again, we're humans too, just as much as you are. It's not a computer that's telling us how to react to things. We see that.
Right. Gil, I saw some thumbs up and some head nodding. So do you want to add your kudos to these answers?
I'm just listening to all this wisdom from these two. My gosh, if I was good as you guys when I was at your age, who knows? You know, who I, but anyway, so just two things, and one of them, permission to go rogue a little bit. Is that all right?
Yep.
So the first piece, students, we only look at you all to Asia's point within the context of your high school or secondary school. You're not going to be penalized again if certain things are not offered, certain things are not available. And we actually have a lot of data. And each of your schools will provide us with, at the very least, a profile, right? And if there's no profile, we go online. We will do our research on our end as well to get to know your respective schools. So again, we look at you guys within the context of your school. We know nationally the average is 287 to 1 in terms of students to counselor, if there's a counselor. In my home state of California, there are almost no counselors. And if there is one, the ratio is 800 to 1, right? So again, we understand this. Now here's the rogue piece. Students, we keep talking about you guys have to own the process. If there are parents or family members in the room, you need to kind of avoid the word we, right? You can't be going to our campuses or write to admission people and say, we're interested in your school. That's a no-no, because now I'm worried, where is the student in the process? We really want you students, right, to be the ones to step up. And this means parents, right? And I'm speaking from one parent to another. Remember when they started playing, Little League soccer, and there's that white chalk, right? We're no longer coaching them. Our jobs now is to be the best cheerleaders we can be. We are now support, right? We're there to prop them up when they're down. We're there to celebrate when they're excited, right? So just to go rogue a little bit, it's for them, right? Not for you.
You can go rogue anytime you want, Gil. You have far more wisdom on this than I do, and that was a brilliant point. Quick follow-up on, I think Darius made this point specifically, but I think we do kind of accept it as conventional wisdom that we typically want juniors and senior year teachers for letters of recommendation. One of our viewers asked, and I've had this question a lot from parents, that would a sophomore teacher maybe make more sense this year if they were able to be in person with that sophomore teacher rather than virtual with the junior teacher? Any gut on that? Any feeling for your next reading season, how you want to be looking at those letters? Darius?
Aisha, was you going to say something?
Oh, Aisha, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Darius. I can follow you.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that's kind of generally what we would say in a typical year, right? That's our line saying junior and senior years. By that time, students are more developed, more, I think, more advanced academically, and just more heading off to college is what I think is what a lot of our ideology is around the junior and senior year. I think the baseline is we try not to get too caught up in the minutia of things. Find someone that knows you well, someone that can speak to who you are and the type of impact, right? When you think of a cheerleader, of a champion, find someone that can vouch for you to get into essentially the college of your choice, right? I mean, the college of your dreams, maybe even make it that extreme. This should be a guardian, a mentor, right? Obviously, we need it from an academic person, but someone who even fulfills more so that role, I think, tends to be some of the best letters. So, I mean, we don't really get too hung up. If we see a freshman year letter, we're like, at least in our office, we're not going to say, well, that's ridiculous. They don't even know this kid, right? We just want to read a powerful letter that is going to be compelling to us and move us to want to advocate and admit the student.
Great. Aisha, did you want to jump into that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be mindful of which sophomore or even freshman, year teacher you're selecting. If you don't have any more contact with them, but you got the best grade in that class and that's why you went with them, you might want to rethink that a little bit, right? I really appreciate ones where there's a growth narrative, right, where they may have them as in 9th grade and then as a junior in English, right? And can speak to the growth that they've seen, they've witnessed. Maybe they had them in a class and then later on where they're a leadership advisor capacity kind of thing. Again, speaking to that growth narrative, we want to see the trajectory that you're on, and the trajectory, if I can say that word, that you are going. And so I think that's more so what it is for us when you're thinking about the intentionality behind the letters of recommendation.
I often tell students you're looking at what kind of student you might be later. And so freshman year is a little farther from that than junior or senior year is.
Absolutely. And I also want to say that, there are some, you're probably involved in some community-based organizations. You probably have counselors and advisors that are helping you in additional support outside of what you're getting out of high school. We accept those letters of rec too. So if you are working with an organization or are a part of a mentorship program, feel free to also use those as supplemental letters. You don't replace one of your academic letters with one from one of those sources, but certainly supplement, right?
Right.
Always allowed.
Which might be particularly valuable this year when students are not having the kind of one-to-one. I'm gonna stick with you for a second, Aisha, because we just got a question that I think would be fun for all three of you to answer if you have a sense of this. What is the average amount of time spent reviewing a single application?
Depends on the school.
We've all read Jeff Salingo's book, so we all know the national average, but I'm just curious if you have that information to share with us. Not to cause any panic.
I don't know the national average off the top of my head, but I know it varies so much because we all use different types of evaluation processes. I've been in a context where I was a single reader, which means I would start off with the application. It would kind of move along to different readers and then go into committee. I'm now in a context where we use committee-based evaluation, which basically means I read with a partner where we split up the half and then we talk about it. So all those require different time commitments depending on the process. So it could take as little, depending on how fast you read, but it takes as little as 10 minutes. And I don't say little lightly, it's still a thorough read, to as much as 20 minutes, just kind of depending on what the requirements of that school's reading process are, to be quite frank.
Great. Darius and Gil, to put you on the spot here at the end.
Yeah, similar. We have actually a hybrid style where certain days of the week I'm reading all by myself. I'm reading my quota for my territory. Other days I'm reading with a team member. Those reads tend to go slower, more intimate, if you will, a deeper dive into the read because one person's dissecting the recommendations. Another person, it's most likely the territory manager, is reading the essay. We actually have we look, go through the transcript and things of that nature. So on average it's anywhere from 7 to 10. I also read international apps. So that's a much longer read. So whenever I do get domestic apps, I'm pretty excited about them, things that look pretty familiar.
Translating transcripts and things.
Exactly. To be candid though, a lot of it, so much of this process, if we're going to speak real, is your transcript. That's the first thing that I see. Right. That is, in many instances, not necessarily my first and last stop. That's my first stop. And a lot of that is influential for the rest of the read.
Yeah.
Especially when you're a selective institution, you're very critical.
We typically, often on the town halls that we do that are sort of informational from our team on nuts and bolts of the college process, we almost always start with the NACAC chart that shows kind of the way different universities value the different components of the application, because I think it's easy to cause panic in getting caught up with all these other pieces when truly college is still school and we're looking for what your academics have been and might be. And so your transcript is really front and center. And I think every transcript tells a story, and that's the story that colleges seem to begin with in their evaluation. Gil, anything to add on how the University of Richmond looks at how long you're looking at these applications?
If any of you go to a public school in Florida, when you become an adult, run for office and have that change, because that transcript, I'm not even joking, takes 2 days to go through, right? And thankfully, it's all digitized now, because I remember the days when I will be, I can tell that Florida folder over there because the transcript is like this long. And I'm like, oh no. But it's true what Aisha said, it depends on the school, but so many of your selective schools will actually also, right? And you heard about CBE, which is, community-based evaluation, but many schools also employ committee, right? So we're so fortunate that, and so many of our applicants are academically competitive. We call it a self-selecting pool. So at some point, it's not enough that you're a wonderful student, you have taken wonderful test scores, wonderful courses, and you have good grades, yada, yada, all this academic information. At some point, we're going to go to committee, because at some point we can only offer admission to so many. And this is when certain subjective things will pop up. And we're going to start asking really tough questions. What really will you add? Will you uphold the honor code? Are you a match in terms of the values that we have? What are you saying about your essay, your recommendations? All that good stuff is something we're going to talk about in committee. And frankly, it's a lot of fun, because there's something, it puts us in a position where we're able to really think about how we can put together this orchestra as we go along.
I love that you ended us there, Gil. I've heard so many admissions officers and admissions teams say that truly you are looking for reasons to bring students to your campus. I think we all feel in such a sort of vulnerable evaluative process that it might be the opposite. But my experience of all of the admissions teams I know is that it is exciting. You're excited to read about a kid and think, I want to get to know this young man. These are things I want to know. And so that's a great place to end us, I think. I want to just jump back to something when Gil said earlier that he thinks carefully about how parents speak. I do want to give a quick plug for my boss's new book. So thank you for setting us up for that. I know many of the folks on our call are big fans of Ned and Bill's first book, The Self-Driven Child. And we've been talking all night about students being able to advocate for themselves. And so the next iteration of this book is how do I do it? What do I say to my child when I want to get them there and I don't want to say the wrong thing? So this book, I believe it doesn't come out until August, but we're very excited. And there's a 43% discount if you pre-order it on Amazon. And with that, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists and our viewers for such thoughtful questions, for these great candid answers. I know we could keep talking for some time, but it is late in the evening and you all have been working very long days. So thank you so much. Our upcoming events, I think, is our next slide. Yes, so we have on February 18th, next week, we will be speaking with Mark Salisbury, the founder of Tuition Fit, about money, about getting your child into college and then also paying for it, which is a pretty critical question, I think, now more than ever. And then our next educational planning town hall takes place on March 11th, also a Thursday at 7 p.m., where we will be digging into maximizing the college visit experience. As you heard, colleges are doing all sorts of backflips to try and give you access to their campuses and their experiences. And so we'll talk with you about how to make the most of that, especially during a pandemic. And with that, I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy and warm. And I wish all of you the very best. Take care.